Log on, tune in, find out. Another good idea from Cambridge.
Well, it's a great honour and pleasure to have a chance to talk to Haroon Ahmed. We've cohabited in Cambridge for many years without having had a conversation, so thank you very much for coming this afternoon. I always start by asking when and where a person is born. Your Wikipedia doesn't give your date of birth, but I presume that's just an oversight.
I was born in Calcutta, in India, in 1936. My parents are not from that region of India. My father happened to be just posted in that particular city at that time when I was born, when 3 of his children were born there.
Tell me about your ancestry as far back as you would like to go, because
my father was a middle-ranking civil servant in the Indian civil service. My mother married at the age of 17, so she'd only just about finished school. My grandfather from my paternal side had died before I was born. I just know him to be also a minor administrator who was involved. He was like a justice of the peace, so, a JP equivalent, and he used to be involved in dispensing justice under the guidance of the local commissioner, whoever was in charge, usually a young Englishman. But my maternal grandfather I knew well as a boy, and he was a civil engineer, but a very successful businessman who made a fortune by building bits of New Delhi while Lutyens was doing it, and also got involved in building airfields in the eastern border of India when Japanese invasion was feared.
Whereabouts, in Kohima or?
They were along the coastline. And it's an interesting story because much later on, of course, they were never used, and then abandoned. But the concrete slabs, the trees and bushes and shrubs grew under them and broke up these slabs. Much later on, people, more or less explorers of that region, discovered these concrete slabs, and then a story came out that these had been. But he made a lot of money through those entrepreneurial activities. And built himself a very fine house in New Delhi, where I mostly grew up to as a young boy, until the partition of India in 1947. So that's my maternal grandfather. My maternal grandmother died when my mother was only 12. And she was a remarkable woman in some ways because she was a photographer in those days, and this is a singular achievement to have been a photographer. And she drove a car, which was also for a woman in India to be doing that, an Indian woman, was most unusual. So I'm sorry that I never met her, but maybe she influenced my mother a great deal.
And this must have been in the 1920s, I suppose. She was driving her car and taking photographs.
Yes, it's true. It was a Chevrolet. So it was an American car. I just remembered the name. It just came back suddenly. I cannot dream of how it's come back, but sort of childhood memories have come back.
What is in fact your first childhood memory, apart from the sort of waving trees in the background of your pram, but any concrete memories from your early life?
That's no, I've not any very worrying memory of my very early years, except a very loving and caring home, which I was the third child. Rather pampered, I think, because the first two were girls, and boys tend to be rather pampered in India and Pakistan. I rather feel that I was pampered. I'm not sure whether I was or not. Anyway, we had a very loving home, and growing up in a very easy sort of way.
Did you have ayahs?
We had ayahs. I suppose I'm 6 years older than my young brother, and I suppose my earliest memories of being jealous of him. Your mentioning ayah reminded me that he had an ayah, and I was now growing out of ayahs because I was going to school, and I greatly resented that he was staying at home and I was going to school.
That's an
It's one of these strange memories that comes back. But the first definitive memories are those of the partition of India, when I was 10, 11.
We'll just get on to those in a moment, but tell me more about your parents and their character, insofar as they has affected you, obviously, deeply, but what sort of people were they?
My father, as I said, was a middle-ranking civil servant who had trained as an engineer and had gone to Germany between the two wars. So he was there in time of hyperinflation, so that will date him into the 30s. And he had gone with a group of Indian students who were not welcome in either India or in the United Kingdom because of having participated in the non-cooperation movements. So he was at Aligarh University, where he got into trouble because of being involved in political agitation. So he went up there. He was, as far as his character is concerned, he was a very mild and unassuming man who had taken a degree of diploma engineer in Germany, which was very highly regarded in Germany. But because the British qualifications were more valued in India, so when he returned, he worked as an engineer and became a reasonably high-ranking civil servant. But his character was very mild and unassuming, but very good-natured. I just felt he
Did he push you at all academically?
No, he didn't push me. He was so tolerant, and he didn't feel like pushing me, but my mother did. My goodness, my mother did. She was only 17 when she married. But
were they cousins or anything like this?
No, there was no relationship between them, and that was good. My maternal grandfather, was a rich man, had to some extent supported my father's education. And when he realized how clever my father was, and he's come back as a diploma engineer, the marriage was arranged.
So it was an arranged marriage?
Very definitely. She was only 17, he was 15 years older. So it was definitely arranged marriage. And that was one of the things that I suppose defines my relationship with my parents. My mother was young. My father was older always, and very staid and sort of calm about things. My mother was very excitable and very forceful character, and she made us do our homework and taught us to speak English at a very early age. Read a great deal herself, although very light fiction, but she'd been to very good schools. She'd had an English governess, which because my father was rich. My grandfather was wealthy. So anyway, she was a very strong influence on me, but I suppose the most strong influence was my sister.
Which one?
I had two sisters. Well, the eldest of the two sisters was 3 years older than me, and she's, as I said to you earlier when we were lunching, that I came under the influence of a number of women. But she was very strong because she was very immensely clever, and I had to run to keep up with her. And to be 3 years younger and chasing behind this person was very useful for me, because I read 3 years before I should be reading her things that she was reading and absorbing things, because she would bring into the house a lot of things that I would never have access to. So she was a very strong influence.
And she was quite protective of you. She didn't bully you or anything.
She didn't bully me, but she wasn't protective. She thought I was spoiled, and she sometimes hid her books from me and sort of thing. But we retained to this day. We're all both old now, but we're happiest of friendships. So we joke with each other. We talk to each other we send emails about what we read and so on to this day, which is so that's.
Your mother, leaping far ahead, but your mother took control of your life later on too, in bringing you perhaps to come to Cambridge.
But she was always in control of my life until I was married, I think. She would know intimate details of what I was up to. And she was a very forceful character. All her children, she
organised their lives.
she looked after them, yeah. She sort of made sure that she was fully informed, and nobody would be unaware of her views on what we were doing. She would state them in a very forthright manner. So she did come to England with me.
We'll come to Kings then later. What religious background were your parents?
My parents were both Muslims, brought up in, but neither was very forcefully, was very religious, strongly religious. They didn't pray regularly. On Eid days, we would all be off to Eid prayers. It's like going to church. Christmas is the only day you go to church, as many families in this country do. We were of that category, that we went on the day of the major religious festival. So I think my father was agnostic more than anything else, but paid lip service to being a good Muslim. I mean, we wouldn't, for example, we obeyed all the sort of general rules of not having alcohol or pork or something, but nobody went to pray regularly. So that was the religious background.
You must have been, you were born in 36, you must have been 7 or 8 during the Bengal famine.
Yes. I was just at that time beginning to read the newspaper. So I would run out, I'd wake up early, and the idea was to get hold of the newspaper before Dad got it, because Father took it off with him, and we didn't get a chance to read it then until much later on. So I would then rush to the newspaper to read it, and I became aware of the famine, yes. But, you know, it didn't make a big impact upon me. It was
Your household wasn't affected at all?
No, we were not in Bengal then, we were back in Delhi by that time. So we were not affected, but we were affected by the news. But it was partition that was coming, and that was the big...
Did you know Ian Stevens?
Yes, I did.
Who was the editor of the Statesman?
Yes, I did. I met him here in Cambridge when he came here, and he was a Kingsman, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
So I met him in Hall or somewhere, and we started talking, and we both discovered. So I read his book, The Horned Moon.
Yes, I did too.
Yes, so I did know him, and then he lived in Chesterton or somewhere. He came to tea with us, yes, when my children were young. My wife reminded me of that. He came to tea with us, and my little daughter untied his shoelaces, which gave him great... Yes, he's a nice man.
Yes.
Yes, very good.
Well, you mentioned the partition several times. Were you in Delhi when that happened, or...?
Yes, we were in Delhi. My father was a minor civil servant, and one of the jobs that he was given was to help with the partition of the assets between India and Pakistan. It made him a key target for the people who were trying to destroy the formation of Pakistan, so to speak. But so he was attacked, and then we were in great danger, the family.
When you say attacked where?
He was attacked on his car was followed and rammed. He escaped because it was rammed very near a police station, and he ran into a police station, and then from there he telephoned and managed to get himself rescued so he and my uncle came to the house, and we were bundled with just what we were wearing. That memory is very clear. And then we went off to the refugee camp.
To the refugee camp?
Yes, that was the only way you could be safe then. So the refugee camps were set up in parts of Delhi, and we had a refugee camp in the same house and area in which my great-grandfather lived. So that whole area was set up as a refugee camp because there was a Muslim community there. And the men patrolled the area with guns and weapons, and all the children and women and so on were huddled into very uncomfortable spaces, and we were in this refugee camp for months.
Months?
2 or 3 months. I mean, my memory is not clear because time for children is odd, isn't it? It's sort of
punctuated by other things and
it's sort of
serial time.
I said certainly there was long enough, and certainly was there for long enough to feel very threatened, and certainly there with the memory of that I was being taught as a 10-year-old or 11-year-old to fire a gun by the men who were patrolling. Say, you know, if we are attacked and we are killed, you grab the gun and fight. So it's interesting memories that. It's a long time ago.
But you weren't attacked, and you didn't have to fire your gun. And
we were, when this refugee camp was under threat, we were lucky we got a mercy flight. There were sort of flights being run between Delhi and Karachi, and they were Dakotas, and we then went to the airport by a route which was very frightening also, because we escaped in a car with my mother lying on top of us to hide the children. Because you see, you probably won't want to put this in the thing, but it's an interesting story that they were attacking cars in which families were going. It's vicious. Communal violence is the worst. Ethnic cleansing, as it's called now. But if they saw a lone driver, they were too busy hacking the others, and they would just pass them through. So my mother lay down on top of us and hid behind. So it appeared as only as that my father was driving, and we therefore escaped through the checkpoints to the airport. And then we were able to go in a Dakota. I remember there were no seats in the Dakota. The children sat in the middle galleyway. That was an escape from.
So all this must have very much disrupted any schooling you were having earlier on, because you presumably started at your first school when you were 7 or 8.
In Delhi. I was at St. Columbus School in Delhi, and I had, I suppose, perfectly good education, but my mother had taught us English, which was a great advantage to go to school speaking almost perfect English, and no doubt with an accent which I have never lost, but very well formed vocabulary and contextual English.
You talk English at home at all?
We talked Urdu mostly. So we all scolded in Urdu. But we did talk a mixture of Urdu and English. But whenever we could, we talked English, and the children talked English to each other. My sister was so much cleverer than me. She was able to also help to make sure that we were getting it right. So we did talk in English. Then I went to St. Patrick's School in Karachi when we went there.
Do you remember any of the teachers there at St. Patrick's?
Oh yes, I do.
How long were you there? And from about age of 10 to?
Age of 11, really. I'd gone to 11 by the time we got there, to 16 when I did my O-levels.
Yeah.
I was at St. Patrick's School. Yes, I do remember the teachers. It was a Catholic missionary school with Irish priests, St. Patrick's. They were all they were priests from all over, from across the world, but I think the principal used to be always somebody from an Irish priest, but later it became more general. Yes,
it was a good school. On the whole.
It was regarded as the sort of second best school at that time in Karachi. Karachi Grammar School was the best, and this was regarded as the second best school. I think my parents would have liked me to go to Karachi Grammar School, but I think we weren't important enough.
I thought you were going to say rich enough, or you hadn't got your...
I think they might have actually found the money, but they'd come out destitute. They had no money whatsoever, but they might have borrowed the money to send us there, but we were not important.
How did your... I mean, you say they came out without any money, and presumably no job for your father either.
Well, there he was lucky because he was a civil servant, and when the transfer of assets took place, one of the transfers was that civil servants on both sides were retained. So anybody fleeing from the Pakistan side, and that was also the case, we must say the quid pro quo was that anybody who went from the Pakistan side to India got their job, and but if from fleeing from India to Pakistan also retained their job. So he kept his job. But we had only the clothes we were wearing. And fortunately with the job also came a house. So he was able to get a house and a job more or less straight away. So within a month he was getting a salary. We didn't suffer all that much. I mean, we did suffer to the extent of nothing but clothes. But it didn't seem a hardship compared with what other people were suffering. We counted our blessings and said we were lucky.
I mean, it's not really part of your life story directly, but I mean, all of us who are looking back on it, particularly British people, and reading accounts, feel that the whole thing was such a terrible mess and handled so badly by the British. Is that your feeling about it? The speed, I mean, that it was done too rapidly.
Yes, I think most historians, it is history now, most historians are now aware that the urgency which Mr. Lord Mountbatten brought to the matter was most unwise and uncaring.
Exactly.
And in fact, there's no better truism to say than to say that one English officer with a dozen sepoys would hold thousands of Indians in check. They did, after all. But at that point, the white man was missing from all the incidents that were taking place. The police tried, and also army tried, and so on, but nobody succeeded. Mr. Gandhi tried, but nobody succeeded because the discipline of having white officers there was no longer there. And that meant that riots took place and the whole thing fell apart. So you're right, perhaps.
Yeah. Yes.
It was hasty and it was really uncalled for, except...
Exactly. It's just personal pride and so on. Anyway, I'm not an expert on it either, so let's move on. I mean, on St. Patrick's, you're getting a teenager now. What? And you're now quite a keen sportsman still. Were you beginning to play cricket and squash and things?
Yes, no, I was not playing squash. I was playing cricket, and cricket was the love of my life, and I was playing cricket all the time. And that was the main difficulty with my mother, because she would catch me and bring me back from wherever she found me by my ear to study. But I played cricket, yes. I played cricket all the time. I played cricket with a lot of people. Many of my peers went on to become test cricketers and played at very high level. I was the most unfortunate. But,
well, a friend of mine is I think he's written a book on Indian cricket, and he's certainly a commentator, Ramchandra Guha.
Oh yes,
and he's occasionally tried to explain the obsession with cricket. I mean, I played it obviously, but I never took to it particularly, why it should get inside the soul of not only Australians and Jamaicans, but also the British.
And Indians, you see. It's a very interesting. Mihir Bose's book is excellent on that. He talks about early cricket in India and how it really fascinates Indians in Pakistan as the game to play. Partly it's because it can be played without physical contact. Pakistan and India, they don't like physical contact games. Soccer and rugby are not played.
Interesting.
And I have always wondered about that. Why I'm so hopeless at at soccer and rugby.
Well, I had a theory from my friend Andre Bataille that the reason there were no restaurants in India till the British brought them, I mean, I'm summarising a bit, was that the caste system. In other words, you couldn't tell who was cooking for you. I wonder whether that might apply to physical contact too.
It could well be that was the reason. It may well be that it's the sort of national characteristic that we keep separate. The space between us is different, and the physical contact theory is one that I evolved that people didn't like. They do wrestling and so on, but that's a sort of separate thing with the physical contact of these games and being hurt. Whereas cricket didn't bring any of these aspects in. And hockey, field hockey, which is played in India, is also relatively free of contact.
Because they developed a famous hockey stick, didn't they, the Indians?
Yeah, the curved stick.
Chose to play with. But so cricket was your obsession, but you did a little bit of... What else did you do at school?
No, I think while I was at school, I did only cricket. Because I played ping pong and table tennis, if you like, and mucked around with a hockey stick. I played hockey as well. But no, cricket was so overwhelming, a need to play cricket all the time, to train for cricket, to practice cricket, to do all the things, read cricket books, play cricket board games, and there was no television.
The other great advantage, I suppose, in India is you can more or less play it nearly all the year, except for the monsoon.
Yeah, we played it all the year round, and I was captain of the cricket team, and I had this other advantage that I could read and do sums. Big advantage to be that. If I misinterpreted the rules to my shame from time to time. I had a rule book. I was passionate about cricket. It still is something that I do. I don't play anymore, of course, but I do watch it and I do follow it very closely.
What about music? Were you interested in music at all?
No interest whatsoever. I didn't listen to music. I didn't have any musical training or whatsoever.
No instruments. You didn't play anything?
No, my mother and sisters sort of dabbled with harmonium and things, but I didn't. Absolutely none. In fact, later in life, much later in life, having married a wife who's very musical, living in an environment which is very musical, of course I turned towards music to sort of find out more about it, and I do enjoy it now hugely when I listen to it, but it's never been a passion.
What sort of music do you like now?
I listen to classical music. I listen to whatever is being played by my wife. She plays the violin in a number of sort of little informal groups, and she goes to the Endellian as a regular subscriber. And I went once or twice, but then I said, no, I'm not. I'm sleeping through it, so I'm not going to go. So music has never been part of my life.
So, were there any? I mean, I mentioned any teachers. Do you remember any before your O-levels who inspired you particularly, or was it after that?
You see, I went to a school where the quality of teaching was very poor.
Was it?
So bad.
This is the second best school in Karachi.
Yes, I was already aware that I wasn't being taught very much. I also suffered from the fact that I was big, which is a great handicap, because I suppose I was big and sort of looked stupid as well. You pushed, you know, in a classroom in which you sat in ranks, they often put the big boys at the back, quite sensibly. But if the big boy also has bad eyesight, it means that you don't see very much of the blackboard.
Yes, because you're short-sighted.
Yes.
At what age did you develop that?
I mean, at 12 I was short-sighted, although it took them a little while for my parents to discover.
How old were you when they discovered it?
I think it was a year, 13 or 14. It was a year or two after they discovered that I was unable to see anything. So clearly one of the advantages was that I learned to listen. That I could listen to the teacher, but I couldn't see what they were writing on the blackboard.
So you went up at the end of the lesson and looked to see what was on the blackboard?
I just heard it. I just heard it, and as I heard it, I made notes. It was, I think, very, very important for me, because I was having to listen. And paying attention is an important aspect of one's learning anything. And paying attention was what came then. The other advantage of doing that was that then you understood what you were being taught if you paid attention. So you had more time for cricket. You didn't have to revise it. You didn't have to learn it from anybody else. So the teachers were not good. I remember the maths teacher being particularly poor, because I could do maths instinctively, I suppose, and it didn't bother me. There was no difficulty in concepts and so on. And I knew that the maths teacher wasn't getting it right. The English teacher was way below the standard of my sister, I felt. So my sister was leading me there. So the teaching was actually really bad. That's why I was talking to you earlier. I was saying that one has to look at starting points. And that starting point was that the teaching was bad, but there were other influences which were very strong.
Your mother and sister?
My mother and sister were both very good, and the English was coming very easily, and I was reading way beyond.
Can you remember what you were reading?
I was reading Jane Austen, I was reading the Bronte sisters, I was reading Stevenson. My favorite book at that time was Treasure Island, as a little boy. I was reading the classical English literature, much to my amazement, when I later on was among scientists in Cambridge and engineers, and I thought, this is quite remarkable how much better educated I am. Although I might not be the same level as a scientist, so somehow I have been educated in a distant part of the world, at least in English literature. So what did we read? We read anything we could lay our hands on. She took me to the British Council and to the American US Information Services, and we borrowed books from there. And she would take me along because she needed an escort. This is sister. And so we took the books. I remember a British councilwoman saying to her and to me, "Oh, you're back again. Have you read them all?" We had. She was just as surprised as anybody could be that we had. I think my sister was actually tested to make sure
she had. What about religion at this stage? It's a Catholic school. You're
no, I must
Muslim.
tell you then, if that's still of interest, I'd keep away from the subject of religion nowadays. When I was 10 or 11, as I said, I was in a refugee camp. I asked my father a pertinent question: why? Why are we in a refugee camp? Why are they trying to kill us? And he told me very honestly, look, these are riots between people of the Hindu religion and people of the Muslim religion. So it's a religious conflict that is taking place, and that's how it is. It is partly on land, of course, but I was that not to know, and I decided then, as a thinking child, that religion was not good for one. And so religion was abandoned then. It then abandoned forcefully. My mother was aware of it and scolded me sometimes, that, you mustn't do that. You don't understand, you're not old enough. But I had talked with him. He had been completely honest with me, and then he accepted that I would not have any religious belief after that.
And that has remained the case.
That has totally remained the case. And it remained the case as I sat through many religious services.
Well, I always ask, I've interviewed more than a dozen heads of houses in Cambridge, many of whom preside at Trinity or King's and so on, and you had to preside at the Body of Christ College,
Yes.
Corpus Christi. I always ask them if they feel a bit hypocritical or uneasy doing this.
I did. When so unexpectedly this honor was bestowed upon me that I was to be master, I went to the 4 or 5 clerics in the college, and I talked with some of the fellows, and they said, look, I have no religious beliefs. I am, however, very strongly believe that you and everybody has the right to their religious beliefs, and I would support that very strongly. And one of them said to me, which I remember to this day, well, Master-elect, if you are prepared to do your duty, we do not hold that against you. I thought that was wonderful. I actually was rather moved by that, and I said, well, look, if that's the trust they have in me, I will go to Evensong. I was fortunate that I married to a vicar's daughter.
Ah.
So she, in Corpus at least, well, long before I went, I had, of course, learnt a great deal about the Anglican faith, because she is a vicar's daughter, and her father was at Christ's here, her grandfather was at Corpus Christi, and her great-grandfather all became vicars. What a history to come to. So I was very, I won't say tolerant, I think that's the wrong word. I was very supportive of other people's religious beliefs. So when I went into Evensong, I didn't know the hymns, but she knows them without even looking at the hymn book. So she sang and she sings and she's musical. So we went into chapel and I did my duty and I read the lesson when I was asked to. I read well. That sounds terribly immodest. We'll cut that out. I read. And I like to read. And so I read the lesson when required. I did my bit. I read the names of benefactors. I did everything. And some were constrained to say that you do that well. So I did it as my duty, but without any feeling. Hypocritical now. I don't think so. I don't think I'd describe it as that. I quite honestly believed that I was doing my duty and to others who had a strong religious belief, and that I would support them.
I think you were chairman of the Philosophical Society, or president
yes.
of the Philosophical Society, so you obviously thought about many things philosophical as well as your particular discipline. I've asked a lot of scientists in particular, because there has been recently a lot of debate with the Dawkins and people about whether religion and science are mutually exclusive or not. And I've noticed an interesting difference between biologists, for example, who are very hostile to religion, and physicists who are much more kind of mystical and say, like Einstein, there's something there but we don't know what it is and it's not a god, and so on and so on. I wondered whether you said you were very tolerant and supportive even, but so you don't think that religion has been destroyed by science?
No, I certainly don't think religion has been destroyed by science. I wouldn't dream of being critical about people's beliefs in religion. It is so overwhelming a force. Wearing completely another hat, I have a great interest in cathedrals. I look with awe at these cathedrals. They started building them in the 11th century. And what powerful forces have moved these people who then built these marvelous cathedrals. And if you look at the history, well, you can look at the history of the chapel, but you can look at the history of some of these cathedrals. They were built, they were torn down, they were built, rebuilt, fire, invaders, and yet there they rise above the sky. You look at the mosques in Islamic countries, and what wonderful buildings are created for the adoration of God. So I have a very great support of religion. It is just a personal view, which I have very strongly, that religion is not for me, and that religion taken to any extreme is very, very dangerous. And that is why these communal riots arose and so on. But very often the religion was used as an excuse for land grabbing and various other wishes that people had in different parts of the world. So the conflict was not necessarily based around religion, but sometimes that was the very basis of it. No, I think my religious beliefs were colored by the effect of partition and remained with me ever since. I brought up my family to believe, my children anyway, to believe that they have to be extremely tolerant, to have strong principles. But they don't necessarily have to be based on religion. They have to be based on the care of other human beings.
Let's move on from St Patrick's. You did O-levels, you say, and then where did you go after that?
So I started in what is pre-engineering degree college. It's called a college in Pakistan. And just at that time, my father was transferred to England. He was having great difficulty with his career, and he chose to be transferred to the equivalent position at the embassy. His job was to inspect and categorize industrial equipment for the industrialization of India and Pakistan. So his job was to actually purchase this equipment, but before that to inspect it and check its technical quality and so on. So he got this job in the Pakistan High Commission here, and he brought his family with him. So in 1954 we came to England, and that was a formative experience as far as the teacher was concerned, because I then went to Chiswick Polytechnic to do my A-levels, because I had to do my A-levels then, because the Pakistan qualification, I hadn't completed it anyway, didn't count for getting into university. And that's the first time I tried to get into Cambridge. And then I was sent this information that needed Latin to do engineering. Did you know that?
I can imagine, yeah. Not Greek at that time, at least.
No, not Greek, but Little Go, what it was called then. I'm old enough to have tried to get in when it was necessary to do Latin for engineering. I thought that was not some. I mean, at that age, one can't wait a year. Somebody said, you could do it in a year. No, I'm not waiting for a year, so I went to Imperial College. But before that, I'd been to Chiswick Polytechnic, and there was a very, very good experience, because they were so kind to me. And I think this is one of the things I'd say about British education systems, and later I was to learn to be part of it, how fair it was. Because I went there, and she tested me, the maths teacher, Miss Tompkins. What's she name? Miss Tompkins. Names come back. Amazing. And she said, you can do all these sums and problems which are way above what all the other children at this school can do, because this is a polytechnic where those who fail their GCSE, don't do too well, come in to sort of try and do their A-level with a second chance. So she gave me the books and her solutions book and said, get on with it. And every now and then she'd come and sort of ask me if I'd got stuck, and she was wonderful. She pushed me way ahead of the others. The physics teacher did a similar benefit to me, because he saw that I could understand physics, and so he made me his assistant. I had to lay out the classroom for the experiments and help him to do the experiment before the other children came to do it. Very lucky. I was extraordinarily lucky. So they made a big impact upon me and helped me, and then I got into Imperial College.
So this must have been in the early 50s you came?
54 we came here. 55 I went to Imperial. In the October of 55.
To read engineering?
To do electrical engineering, yes. That's what I
Can you remember, just going back one step, your first memory of England? I mean,
very clear.
You must have had an image before you came, and how did it fit?
Yes, we had, my sister and I had read a lot about England. We also had these passions for cricket, which she shared actually. Loved cricket herself, watching cricket, and so we knew a lot about England. But we remember landing with BOAC. That's the British always.
Yes, I flew in it. Yes.
Oh yes, So it lands at this sort of huts that were terminal for overseas flights. They literally were huts. And then you get into a bus to come to the centre of London, and we see these houses, and we say, I remember my sister saying, hey, look, those are the dolls' houses. Because we had dolls' houses made in England. And so the little terraced houses we passed through were dolls' houses. And so that was a very early memory. And then we stayed at the Regent Palace Hotel in the centre of London for a couple of weeks while they found us accommodation. A large family had arrived. And I'll tell you one funny thing. Don't know, maybe I'll cut it out later on. So we went downstairs, my sister and I marched downstairs because we were short of news. We were used to reading the newspaper already at home, and here we came. So we went down and we looked at one or two newspapers, and they seemed to us rather parochial local newspapers, we thought, and that we looked at the Telegraph or something, and we looked at this newspaper which said News of the World. We marched up with it, and my mother grabbed it, and she tore it into pieces, and said, we were not to go down by ourselves again. I remember that story. You made me think of some. Anyway, the first impressions of England were very positive. We loved it. We enjoyed ourselves, and we used to go down to the restaurant, and then all this English food seemed terrible. So I can remember my sister and I saying, what you would like is fried eggs, please, for dinner. They were very kind to us. They gave us fried eggs.
Right. Well, let's go on to Imperial College.
Yes.
Were there any inspiring teachers?
Yes, Imperial was full of inspiring people. I first came into contact with Dr. Boothroyd, later to be Professor Boothroyd, that left Imperial College, and he taught me transistors, which was just coming up then. So I learnt about transistors, and then there was John Lamb, later to be head of electrical engineering at Glasgow University, who taught me the physics of electronics. And then there was Mr. King, who supervised my project, and he supervised my project, and he had a big influence because he'd been here at Clare College, and later was to direct me to Cambridge. So lots of people there were very, very good teachers. There was Denis Gabor, later to have his Nobel Prize for holography, who wanted me to stay on to do a PhD with him. I was terrified of him, so I said, no, thank you, sir.
You did quite well, presumably.
I did well at Imperial College. I'm not quite sure how, but I did well at Imperial College. I think that at that time, and as always afterwards, I kept telling people that the basis of engineering is mathematics. And if you can do maths, engineering is a rather easy subject, because everything else is built around this mathematical base. And I was good at maths at that point of my life. I got more marks than, I got the top marks, I think, in maths with my...
In your year?
In my year. That brought me... That was very helpful later in life as well. So Imperial was a very good place to be in. I worked very hard there, particularly in my final year.
Were you doing anything else, student politics, or going to plays, or any social life?
I had a difficult experience there. My parents went back. They only stayed in England for a couple of years. Went back and left me in charge of my younger brother as well. I don't know who was in charge, I must admit. But between us, we were left here in England and had to live in digs and things. And I was more or less, look, he was at Latimer School, so he was a schoolboy still, 6 years younger than me. But they decided to leave him. I don't know why they decided to leave him, but they did. And we had a difficult time.
Is it financially, socially, psychologically, or in every way?
In those days, you see, Britain has now race laws and against racial discrimination. They didn't in those days. We had a lot of troubles.
I remember interviewing Sir David King, and he said he was thrown out by apartheid, and when he came to London looking for digs, they had all these notices saying no blacks or Irish wanted. I was amazed. I remember that time, but you forget so quickly.
That's exactly the notices we had too. My brother and I, my little brother and I was 20 and he was 14, but he was big and looked about 15, 16. Had the door slammed on our faces at places because we needed some digs to live in. We wanted to share a room. So we were brothers, we just want to share a room, and we have somewhere to live. My parents actually left us in quite a nice place when we were there, but we lost it because there was some argument and the place got closed down or something. So we had to find other digs. So it was a difficult time. So I didn't do much at Imperial College except play some sport. We played sport. I continued to play sport, but I didn't have enough time to play in the team because I'd play in a club side with my brother, local, at Gunnersbury Park and so on. So didn't have time to play much sport at high level, which was why my sport went down. But we had a difficult time then, and it was Shepherd's Bush. And when was Enoch Powell's speech?
The Rivers of Blood speech.
Anyway, at that time there was a lot of racial tension. I remember both of us nearly getting beaten up by teddy boys. It was not racism, it was our fault actually. I'm thinking about it. We just laughed at their clothes. We shouldn't have done that.
They would have beaten anyone up who laughed at their clothes, but they had no excuse in your case. I mean, I was thinking about whether to carry on that theme a little bit, because I think one of the reasons that Ken Moody particularly felt it would be very interesting to interview you, I think he said that you were the first president or master of a Cambridge college from India or Pakistan. Was he right?
No. That's not right, because Amartya Sen was master of Trinity,
yes.
and he's very distinguished. And
But was he before you?
He was just before me, a year or two. But what I was saying to Ken is that Amartya Sen wasn't an immigrant to this country. He was an Indian that they think. I regard myself as British, and totally British, because I came here in '54 and took British nationality. I've never had any link with Pakistan since then. And so I'm an immigrant. I became an immigrant I became an immigrant right from the beginning, but there was laws which made me change my status. So I was the first immigrant to be elected to a mastership, and the second from Asia, but the first immigrant. But I was also the first, what I'm very proud of, is the first immigrant from Pakistan to be a professor at this university.
Really?
That's what I'm really proud of. I suppose if I think back, I don't want to get myself into trouble with the college, but the moment of sheer pleasure, which I thought I was walking on the moon or something, was when I was made a professor, because it was such a struggle.
Struggle?
To get there.
Was it a personal chair or
It was a personal chair.
When did you get it? Remember the year?
1990, or maybe it's 1980 something. I'll have to look it up. I'm sorry, I should have perhaps done my
Late 80s
homework.
or early 90s.
Yeah, because I was 9 years a reader. Did you come through the system?
I was
here?
10 years a reader.
Yes.
And then I got a chair.
It's tough, isn't it, when you are a reader for that long and your work is going. So some people just get overlooked. It must have been.
I was in the last chance, because if you remember, you were allowed to be put up for 5 years, and then they had to take you off, and then they put you up for 5 years, and this is my last chance.
You know, I'm of the time when they didn't have any such rules.
Didn't they?
They didn't have rules. You were just a secret committee that promoted you. In fact, I can tell you the more interesting story is when I was made a reader much earlier on. because I was very fortunate in that I got a grant from the EPS, from the SCRC as it's called then, which included a secretary. It was such a large grant, it had management consequences, and I said, if I could do the research, how can I do it with a secretarial support? So the secretary noticed that there was a letter addressed marked private and confidential. He said, I haven't opened this for you because it's marked private and confidential. Oh no, I said, that's my pensions thing. Leave it alone, we'll look at it later. So we did the whole day's work. Just as I was leaving, I said, well, look what these pension people want. And there's this letter, comes out of the blue saying, we are minded to make you a reader. Would you like this job? Amazing, isn't it?
It is amazing. Did they ever tell you what the job was?
No, they told me that they would promote me to reader and I could have my readership assigned to any department at the university that was willing to have me.
That was true.
Now, I said, I've been in engineering for 20 years. I'd like a change. And I asked if I could go to the Cavendish. And Ian Nicol, who I regard as one of the great Secretary Generals of this university, rang me up and said, are you sure you want to do this? I said, yeah, it says so in the letter. It says, not many people have done this, you know. I said, well, is it against the rules? And he said, no, it's not against the rules, but the rules are that if the department's willing to have you and the other department's willing to let you go, you can go. And England is a very civilized country. Why am I saying this to you? So everything's done in a civilized way when it can be. So the two heads of departments had lunch together. And one said, but Ahmed wants to come to us. The other said, yes, Ahmed wants to go. We don't want him to go, but if he really wants to come to you, he can go.
Very civilized.
It was totally civilized, yes.
Do you know when that was? I mean, that would give us a date for your professorship, when you got your readership.
Yeah, that is 1980?
Yeah, so making 1989.
Yes, some very close to that.
But you were probably never told. I mean, I know what a reader is expected to do because I got my readership 1 year after you and I inquired, but actually, as you know, it's 2 lines on a piece of paper.
No duties.
So, do you know what the rules are?
There are no duties specified for readers. I looked at the statutes and ordinances.
Except you have to be available to your students for 1 hour at a specified place a week.
Something like that. So it was, I think that, I said this earlier to you, that I think one of the most remarkable systems in the country is our higher education system and how fair it is. It is totally without any sort of bias, which we found in life in other aspects. But in the education system, we are very fair, and this interview is going wrong, isn't it?
No, it's fine.
It's going sort of out of sequence.
It doesn't matter.
Because I wanted to tell you that my early experience, that I am a great admirer of this education system, and I only know Cambridge, but I know Imperial a little bit as well. And I was put on the examining board at the engineering department, and I was very young. And I was quite worried about being on the examining board. And while we were classing the students, we came across this character who'd done badly in one particular aspect of engineering, and not too badly in my disciplines. He'd got a 3rd in mine, but he'd failed in the others, and the motion was put that this man should be failed. Sir John was chairing it, and as I've told you before, he was very partial to me, so I thought maybe that's why I was put on the board when I was very young. So I said, well, he's not done too badly in my subjects. Sir John looked at me and said to me, our young member, may I say a few words to you as you're doing this for the first time? Our role here is to do entirely and only justice. We are not to show any sympathy or support for anybody unless we feel that would be a just decision. So if you feel that doing justice, you would like to pass this man, we will listen to you. But if you think it would be unjust to pass this man, we won't. So consider that advice I give you and then give us your opinion. So I thought about it and I said, well, the marks in these subjects are so low that this man cannot possibly serve as an engineer, as a professional engineer. So I said, no, having listened to you, I think I agree with you that it would be unjust to pass him. He was failed. I learned a lesson, however, that there was no other way of judging. Just do justice. And it stood me in good stead, that advice. Those aspects that one hasn't taught, you might have missed something. Oh, excuse me. For that interruption.
After Imperial, as an undergraduate, what did you go on to do a PhD?
No. What happened to me at Imperial, that I got a very good degree. I got a first, and said to be in a very good first, and so but I wanted to return to Pakistan. But my father suggested that I should do some sort of industrial training. So I became an apprentice. I was twice an apprentice. First, before I was a student, and then this time I became apprentice to a company which is no longer around, sadly, GEC, a very prominent company, and became an apprentice at
General
GEC.
Electronics, was that?
It was electrical engineering.
Yeah.
I was then not committed to electronics as such, but to electrical engineering, because in Pakistan there wasn't much electronics, and I was going to go back and set up power systems and power distribution and generation in Pakistan, which is what my father wanted me to do. So I went off to be an apprentice at GEC, and that was a very... before that, when I'd been at Imperial, they had said, do you want to stay on to do a PhD? And I didn't even know what it meant. So I said, no, that's not for me. So I became an apprentice. While I was an apprentice, I met Donald Beck and David Young, two other apprentices who had graduated from Cambridge. And by chance, I became very friendly with them. And with Donald Beck, I'm still very friendly after all these years. And they started telling me stories about Cambridge and how wonderful it was, and how they could spend all your time playing sport if you were minded to do so. And I thought, what a wonderful opportunity, go to Cambridge and play sport. So I went back to Imperial College to consult the person, Mr. King, who I mentioned already, perhaps. He was my project supervisor. We did a final year project, and he supervised me very closely. And he'd been very kind to me and helpful. So I went to see him and said, look, I've been thinking that this being an apprentice isn't quite the lark I thought it was, because I'm not very good.
Was that in Manchester, the apprentice?
It was in Birmingham.
Birmingham.
I'm not that good with my hands, and I've had, as part of the apprenticeship, they've sent me to Wembley to their research labs. And I loved it, because when I went to the research lab, I was asked to do something by one of the research scientists, and later that afternoon I took it to him, and he was very pleased with the outcome, because I think he'd been struggling with the problem for a little while, and we'd sorted it out, and he suggested to me that I should be doing research. So anyway, that was very formative, because I went off to Mr. King, and he said, well, why don't you try for a scholarship now to Cambridge to do a PhD? So he helped me look around, and I looked at all the advertisements about scholarships being available, and came across the one at King's. There was one at Trinity and one at King's. And I applied for these.
Was it a named?
It was called the King's College Open Studentship, to do research.
In science?
I don't even think it said sciences, but it was King's College Open Studentship, I remember. So I then applied, and I came for that interview, which I've told you the story already. A group including Paul Dykes. Did you know him? Engineering fellow. And Kendall Dixon, and I can't remember who the other people, I don't know who the other people were, interviewed me, and I was lucky enough to get the studentship.
But tell the world the story you told me about how they forgot to tell you about you got your scholarship.
Yes, in fact, I'm going to produce the evidence if I can find it, because somewhere in the loft there are some papers of my early years. And when I have in the summer, I'll have the energy to go into the loft and find them. So I'll try and find the actual telegram and correspondence with
Perhaps
Kings.
I can have a copy of this for my archive.
See if I can find it. Alan, you can have it if I find it. I might have destroyed it, but it might be there still in those papers. And it's merely, the story is that I went off after the interview and I heard nothing, and I just assumed that I hadn't got the scholarship when I got the telegrams that if I didn't respond by return of post, the scholarship would be given to the number 2 candidate. And in fact, it was quite a scolding letter from what I remember. A scolding telegram. Anyway, I immediately responded that I wanted it. And I think Kendall Dixon then said, "Oh dear, the original letter is still lying on my desk. But there's no need to send it to you now." So there I was. But he was very kind to me. He made a point of giving me a room in college for my first year, which research students usually didn't get. I was uniquely, I think, the research student who was here because the interview had gone very badly, because they'd asked me about music, and I said no, I infinitely preferred sport to music. I didn't realize then that it was the wrong thing to say in King's. So he said that he'd give me a room in college so I could get to know some of the other sportsmen, who were mostly undergraduates, you see, and which I did, and I had a wonderful time as a result.
Do you remember your first memory of coming to Cambridge?
Yes, indeed, very clear.
Was the sun shining?
Oh, the first time when I came for the interview.
Yes.
Oh, that was funny in itself. In fact, an interesting story, because I still have the book I bought then to enable me to go to sleep, because I thought I'd be very nervous. And at the Cambridge railway station, there was a bookstall in those days, some bookshop, and I bought The Masters by C.P. Snow to read. So it was a good read,
yes.
without realizing that I would suffer the same fate much later on. So that was an early memory. I also remember that I got up to the Catholic Church and I thought I'd arrived at King's, because I'd been told at the station. I was too nervous to take a taxi. Probably didn't have the money either, but I was going to walk to King's. I had plenty of time, but I thought I'd arrived when I got to the Catholic Church. Somebody told me it looks like a church. Which it does.
What was the subject of your PhD?
I worked on electron emitters, they're called cathodes, under the supervision of A.H. Beck and Sir Charles Oatley. Sir Charles was a fellow of Trinity, and very strong influence on my life from then onwards. But you see, King's had Professor Moulin, who was very ill by then, who was the electrical engineering professor, the first professor of electrical engineering, I think. But he was very unwell then and died a year or two later. So the person who was running the engineering department was Sir Charles Oatley for electrical engineering.
Why was he such an influence on you? In what way was he such an influence?
Well, there were so many times that he changed my life. First of all, he was an outstanding scientist, and he suggested that I should work with the scanning electron microscope. So I moved from cathodes to the scanning electron microscope, and that was a much bigger and much more important topic. He encouraged me in that. Then, when I did reasonably well with my PhD work, he asked me whether I would like to stay on to do some postdoctoral work, at which point I said I'd been offered a job in California. Maybe that was one of the big mistakes of life, perhaps, not take it. But
not going to California?
Yeah, well, I might have gone to California, but anyway, I didn't, because I was offered a fellowship. It was called the Turner Newell. It's a university fellowship. So I took that. But then again, he was a big influence in my life, because after a year of doing that, I think I gave a presentation of my work. And then he more or less caught me in the lab. I used to be a sort of help with the demonstration. Not that it was my duty, but with teaching experiments in the class, in the lab class. And he came up to me and said, would you like to stay on the staff to teach? I said, well, it hadn't been my ambition, but he said, well, there's going to be a vacancy. There's going to be an advertisement, and you should try and... so I didn't apply, but he called me in anyway for the interview. So I was called for the interview, and amazingly enough, they appointed me. So he was again a big influence.
Was this a lectureship?
Assistant lecturer, demonstrator it was called in those days,
yes.
but it was the same as assistant lecturer now. The term has been abolished.
Yeah.
But it was I think he decided by then that I would be able to teach. So that's how I came, through his influence, to becoming a university
Have you enjoyed teaching?
Hugely. I think I've had a wonderful life, I think. I enjoyed teaching. I taught myself to teach. And that was interesting as well, because I think that many people in those days, not now, now we're much more professional. In those days, people were unprofessional in teaching, that the delivery of the lecture, at whatever way they wanted to deliver it, was enough in itself. Now, I didn't believe that. I felt very strongly that the purpose of the lecture was to teach, and not to show off one's own great knowledge of the subject, or to be an inspiring figure that has walked in and walked off. So I taught. And I think that led to very big changes, which I was then part of creating those changes in Cambridge in itself, because after that there was a very strong influence on making sure that undergraduates had teaching.
So the lecturing you really came to like, and like doing lecturing, both the writing and the giving of the lectures you enjoyed.
And then I wrote my second book, Electronics for Engineers, which was designed to teach. And that became a success, because it's still in print, 1973 to now. For an electronics textbook to remain in print for, is it 20? It's
36 years.
36 years is a long time. It's hard to believe that it's actually stood the test of time in that sense. Because, again, I believe very strongly that one should teach principles. And once the principles have been understood, the rest is frills, which you can acquire. But if you haven't acquired the principles, you will not acquire the frills, but remain superficial in your knowledge. So that book actually is still in print, because it did concentrate on principles, with my colleague Peter Spreadbury, who was also a very big influence on me.
Did you, I mean, Cambridge is famous for its, I don't know whether it's so much in science, but certainly in the arts, humanities and so on its famous in its supervision system, i.e. 1 to 2 or 1 to 3 kind of personal teaching. Did you do much of that?
Oh yes, an enormous amount. But only, so while I was, yes, that has actually, may I put it slightly more chronologically?
Yeah.
If I may, because there's an interesting story for you to know, which I want to tell actually, because I think it's quite important to put the context of all those who've come to Cambridge from outside to see. I was here first as the only foreigner, so to speak, in the engineering department. And yet, Cambridge has the duality of department and college. Now, I wasn't elected to a fellowship. So, from being a demonstrator, I moved to a lectureship, and 3 years later, I was promoted. Now, by this time, I'd become strongly aware of the college system. I knew as a student, of course, the college system, but I hadn't been aware of the fellowship system. Now I wanted to be a fellow. It was something missing. If I was going to have a career in Cambridge, I wanted to be a fellow of college. So I had what might be described as a horrible time in this, because I looked around and there were people coming in and getting fellowships, and Haroon Ahmed, whatever he was doing, was not going to get a fellowship. 4 different colleges interviewed me, approached me because people in the engineering department put my name forward, or somebody would, or something, and I wasn't elected. One was a very interesting experience. After the interview, I had this letter saying they really, really liked me. They thought I was wonderful. But could I possibly accept a 2-year period of probation before being made a fellow? I declined. I said, no, I thought that was almost rather insulting. And I was then invited to have tea with the master. But the letter was couched in such, later on I was to be almost as hypocritical, but in such a pleasant manner that I felt I had to go. So I went to have tea. I was very impressed with the master's lodge and so on. So I went to have tea. And he explained to me very politely that it was nothing racial, it was cultural. Would I be able to cope with the cultural aspects of living in college and as a bachelor and mixing with the fellows in equal terms and so on? And would I reconsider my decision not to accept this proposal? And I told him quite politely that, look, I would not reconsider it. I thought it was completely inappropriate. In what way do you think that I'm culturally inadequate? Would you like to talk to me about some aspect of the history of England, or the history of the world, or the philosophy, or something, and we can discuss whether I'm culturally inadequate? And he said, no, it's not me. I am totally on your side. I was leading the battle to have you elected, but we are a fellowship and a democratic system, and the votes have gone against you being elected immediately. So I declined. It was a difficult time in Cambridge in those days. So Corpus was wonderful. They elected me.
This was the early 60s?
67.
67.
That date I do remember. And as you said yourself, chance plays a part. I think Sir Frank Lee, who was then master, had seen me. I think he'd seen me playing cricket.
And that was enough. You were one of us.
Listen, you know better than I do that cricket is a part of the cultural heritage of this country. And to behave on a cricket field perhaps was the calming influence. But I don't have any negative feelings about Cambridge. It was a different world then. But it was a pioneering moment because I was elected to teach in a college in Corpus. And I think I was the first teaching fellow who was from Asia in any of the Cambridge colleges.
Gosh.
So it was an interesting experience because you see, again, the worries are intense. Because I thought they'd have trouble with my accent, the students. So after giving my first series of lectures and so on, I turned to them and turned to one or two of the people who came to see me afterwards and said, did you have any difficulty following you? No, he says, you're clear as a bell. You speak with that, we can hear your accent, but you speak so gradually and slowly that following your lectures is a pleasure in itself. But that Scotsman, I was really thrilled.
Well, you backtracked to that from the question about undergraduate supervision, because once you went to Corpus, you were doing quite a lot of.
Indeed, huge amounts.
And did you enjoy that?
Yes, very much. I thought I learned a great deal. I supervised from 5 to 7 because I was committed to research and I couldn't possibly leave the lab in the daytime. So my children learned to eat their supper at 7:15. They hold it against me to this day because their friends all ate at 6 and they had to wait at 7:15. So I taught from 5 to 7. I enjoyed my supervisions. I hope I did some good. I have hugely friendly relationships with very large numbers of... I lectured to 7,000 in the engineering department.
Wow.
So at one time, and now they're all going past it, of course, I could go virtually anywhere in British industry and somebody would come up to me and say, "Hello, Dr. Ahmed. Hello, Professor. Do you remember me?" I said, "Tell me your name. I'll try and remember you." But this is lecturing, and goodness knows how many I taught for supervisions, very large numbers. But I stopped when I became a reader. So concentrated on research after that.
And what about doctoral supervision? You've done a lot of PhD supervising.
Yes, I've had nearly 100 PhD students.
Gosh.
So they're a huge number. I think they're probably about 80 something actually, to be accurate. And that was just so wonderful because every time I was tempted away from Cambridge, as you must have been, the one thing that brought me back was what wonderful people one has to work with here, who stretch one, even if they're 21 and you're a 50-year-old professor, and then you got into a discussion and you found, my goodness me, am I learning something? So I think my PhD students were just gold.
I mean, some educational reformers well away from academic life usually feel that you should separate research and teaching, and then you should have research dedicated professors and you should have teachers, which they're doing in some universities. Do you think that's a good idea?
No, not at all. I would be strongly opposed to that because the two play a part in making things work. People have to have the information that comes from teaching, and there's no clearer understanding of a subject that comes until you've taught it. This is what my belief is, that those things that I have taught well, I have been forced to understand at the basic principles. I strongly believe that teaching and research must go together and helps both sides. But I do come back to this point that many people who do research feel that teaching can be done in a second-rate way because their research is so good, and I would be strongly opposed to that. So I suppose one's paid to teach here. It's a big effort to learn to teach properly, to teach well. I bought myself a tape recorder.
And listen to yourself.
To listen to my teaching, that's how awful I was. The gaps were in the wrong place.
If you were giving advice to a young person starting out on teaching, say lecturing particularly, is there anything specifically, apart from the gaps being in the right place, that you would recommend to them?
Yes, I spent a lot of my time thinking about how to teach, and some of this is reflected in the book, Electronics for Engineers. You must make sure that you're teaching not to impress, but teaching to inform, to excite, to inspire. And so what we did in the book was to create, for example, keeping the attention of the class is important. So we created very early on the concept of stopping the lecture halfway along to give a quiz. So what we would do, Peter and I did this together, we did these experiments together, my co-author, and we'd stop the lecture halfway through and we prepared these overhead projectors just coming into. So we'd have this ready and so flick it on. And there was a quiz. So I'd say, look, there's a 5-minute break, there's a 5-minute quiz. For 5 minutes, I want a break, you want a break. You do this quiz, and then we'll do a little test afterwards. Be honest, because if you're dishonest, it doesn't matter. You only fool yourself. I'm testing myself, not you. And they were quite relieved with that. So they do the quiz, and I'll say, look, hands up all those who got 10 out of these 20 questions right, and the forest of hands would go up, and I would be greatly relieved. And then I'd say those who got 15 right, and then it's a number less, and I said 20 right, and 2 hands would go up, and say, look, I've obviously failed. And this would bring the house down, Sort of say, hey, next time, let's see if we can do better. So after every 3 or 4 lectures, we'd use this quiz. I gave a 20-lecture series. So it was to mingle with the students and get them involved in this. They were terribly nice to me. And they gave me, we had to give them these little white pieces of paper. This started when I was in my time.
Yeah.
Before that, we had no check. In my time, we had to start giving out these white sheets of paper, and my daughters would analyze these for me and plot out the graphs and so on, and I could see that I was improving as a lecturer. And that's shot off the scale because of this a wonderful one. Many years later, giving one of my last lectures, and this white sheet of paper came back to me which said, I was a professor, but dear Professor Ahmed, enjoyed your lectures, also learnt a little, but could you change your scriptwriter? The jokes are the same as the ones my father heard.
Very sweet.
So you've gone through a generation.
Time to move on. Let's now get to your research. I often place the interviewee in the position of summarising for the future 2 or 3 of the bits of research they would really like to be best remembered for, what they have achieved in layman's terms. So could you possibly do that?
Yes, I'll try. So I started my research using the scanning electron microscope, but early on I had come to the conclusion that this subject was something that had moved on, and that I'd like to start something new. So a derivative of that is to use the electron beam, which is used in microscopes to examine objects, to actually make things small. And I had come to this from the work of my colleague, or perhaps I should really call him a mentor, Alec Brewers, with whom I spent a year, a very formative year in IBM, where he was leading the research. And as I mentioned to you earlier, he had shared a flat with me, and I'd got to know him, and he's a very fine research worker, and he had set up this activity in America. So when I spent a year with him at his invitation, that year was wonderful. I learned so much in that year, because first of all, it is America, where everything moves at twice the pace here. But then he was very good, and he was leading it and so on, and he was creating a research group. So I came back and I said, well, we must do this in England. So the first work on electron beam lithography, writing with electron beams, electronic circuits on chips, was what I started. And I'm very proud of the fact that I started it here. It never reached what they were doing in America. They were really moving ahead, but at least we got started here. And I started that together with my colleague Geb Jones, who's now a reader in the Cavendish. So we started that together, and I thought that was pioneering work for this country. Then, having done that, I later went back to America for another period to work in the semiconductor industry, making chips, but also becoming more interested in how semiconductor chips worked and so on. So I started working on that. Then I came back and started working on semiconductor devices in the time when they were still just about to the stage where they could be put into computers, personal computers. And that was, again, in this country, it pioneered the activity in that sense, and particularly in this university that we started working in that area. of making these chips. And I set up the collaboration in this area with the Hitachi company from Japan. And so that's the second topic. The third topic that arose out of that work was that we became interested in reaching the fundamental limit of where chips could go. And a fascinating thought was that can we actually make an information bit, that is transfer of information, using just one electron? Mostly chips use collections of electrons. They go from A to B and therefore define whether it's a 0 or a 1. The presence of electrons would be 0, their absence would be a 1, or the other way around if you like, a bunch of electrons. But we wondered whether we could do this with just one electron. And that was very exciting because towards the end of my career we published the work on single electron devices. That how single electrons, although you had to reduce the temperature to that of liquid helium, they could in fact define an information bit. Of that work I'm immensely proud, and I thought that would get me some pleasure and recognition. But that was about the time that I was leaving science because of the unexpected move towards college matters. So those are the three areas that I became most involved in and most aware that I had made some sort of contribution to that. But Hitachi was very important. The people from Hitachi were outstanding and they helped me a lot. So Sam Edwards, a Cavendish professor then, was enormously helpful in facilitating my move from engineering to the Cavendish. I'd spent 20 years in engineering, and the opportunity to work in the Cavendish with colleagues like Professor Michael Pepper and with other people there who had a very basic understanding of physics was very important for me. And of course again with Professor Brewers as he returned back to Cambridge and was again a very forceful figure in science until he moved off to becoming Master of Churchill and then Vice Chancellor. It remains to this day one of my longest standing friends.
Well, I hope I'll have a chance to talk to him at some point. But
I hope so, yes.
What are the implications of getting it down to a single electron?
Oh yes, I should have mentioned that. So the way chips have gone into our lives is that as they've become smaller, the actual device that controls the flow of electrons is the transistor, and as that's become smaller, it's been possible to put more and more information on one small chip. So the amount of information that you can put on the chip, or the amount of functionality that you can create on the chip, defines how complex a system one can make with it. And not only complex, how portable a system. So complexity and portability both are enhanced by making the chip more functionally capable. Now, the more you reduce the number of electrons taking part in this exercise, the more complex you can make the chip. There are many subtleties to this argument, but the basic principle is absolutely right. The more you reduce the number of electrons, the more complex you can make the eventual chip. So, where's the limit? The limit is 1. Otherwise, you have to think of a different principle altogether. So, because of this limit, it was very interesting to explore this. So eventually, chips use fewer and fewer electrons. And when we get down to sort of 50, 10, 100 electrons, there is some uncertainty of whether their action is taking place. But the one electron device brings certainty. The absence of one or presence of one is certainty. So it's a very interesting philosophical concept as well. So it's approaching the limits, and therefore it pioneers the way for what might happen, say, 20 years from now. Maybe it won't happen, but we will be moving towards smaller electrons, smaller numbers of electrons.
Would it mean that, I mean, you know Moore's law in relation to computing,
Sure.
Does it mean that, I mean, some people said we're coming towards the end of the application of Moore's law, that we've reached some level where it won't continue to double
Well,
in
at
power?
one electron it certainly will come to an end because there isn't anywhere else to go.
Yeah.
But until we reach to this very small numbers, maybe it will only go to very small numbers of electrons. Until we get there, this Moore's law will continue to give us more and more complex devices, making them more and more portable, and more and more coming into our lives as technical objects that we can use. Mobile phone becomes easier, if it's charging time, if it could be that you only had to charge it once a month, or if your laptop could remain active for a week before you had to charge it. It'd make life a lot easier, because I always get caught on the train. So there are some changes to come out of this, which could be quite significant. So yes, it's a big step forward.
I was wondering, just to date this interview, the Copenhagen meeting started yesterday on future of climate change and so on. I wondered whether any of your work, or certainly the work of Sir Richard Friend, who you know in the Cavendish, you thought might have any implications for the future of conservation of energy or any areas like that.
Well, it isn't a direct impact, but anything that uses less energy is good. Good for business, good for the environment. That's one aspect, but that's the first sort of things, the first thought that comes to mind. But the more important thought is that as we become aware of the environment and what is happening to us, we have two solutions which are possible. One is, of course, to use less energy and try and do something about carbon emissions. But the other is to also to provide ourselves with some technological solutions, to look for answers, because we built this world around technical advances of such huge proportions in so short a time. And I think that anything that we have done in chip technology and microelectronics, which is the title of my chair, is to arm us with the means of sort of developing technology, which may, I'm not saying that it will, but which may make it possible to solve some of the problems that we are faced with, this sort of otherwise environmental catastrophe that's coming. I play golf, as I mentioned to you, and when I go to Scotland, I'm amazed at the changes that are taking place. The golf course used to close on the 1st of November, now they play all year round. The climate has changed.
Yeah. You may not, sorry.
No, you wanting to stop?
No. You may not want to talk more about this, but I asked David King about the work of Richard Friend on plastic logic and on polymers and ways of capturing sunlight not using silicone-based systems. I wondered whether you know of this work and whether you think it's promising or not.
Well, I think he's absolutely brilliant and the work is very promising, I'm sure. But the thing is that I sort of more or less left science 10 years ago. In some ways I'm sad about it. But in other ways I had another job, so I'm out of touch. But one of the great figures in recent times in this university has been Richard Friend. And I think that he's doing some fantastic work. But I'm not in touch with everything at a detailed level at the moment.
Okay, well let's go across to that other part of your life then. To your surprise, you were elected Master of Corpus. Why did you do it? Why did you want to be, apart from being the first?
Oh no, it was, I have to go back to saying to you that I was elected a Fellow of Corpus, and I then so honoured. And Corpus then became, because 4 other colleges had turned me down, therefore Corpus became something, and Sir Frank Lee, the then master, became something of a hero figure. You see, chance made me master many years later, so I got access to those papers that elected me. Perhaps I was naughty to look at them. But then I couldn't resist the temptations of curiosity. So I realized that he had played a fundamentally powerful part in having me elected, because even in Corpus there was powerful opposition on basis which I can now sense as racist, disguised as cultural. But he had fought those forces and got me elected. And you will probably know from your knowledge of the history of Cambridge that many colleges up till 1919 did not permit the admission of Indians to the college. Did you know that?
No, I didn't. Indians especially, or
Indians.
Sounds a bit bizarre.
No. The only people in those days from the British Empire who were capable of coming to study at Cambridge were Indians. They couldn't come from Africa or Aborigine Australia or something. The Indians were threatening because they were clever and they could do sums and they could do all sorts of things, and they were threatening to come to universities. There were universities in their own countries.
This was after Ramanujan.
No, the telling moment came at the end of the Great War.
Because Ramanujan had been, wasn't he before the war? But he wasn't a fellow. Well, he was a fellow.
He was a fellow, but it was to admit it as undergraduates
I see.
that the difficulty arose in many colleges. Not at Trinity. Trinity was very much a pioneering college and took all sorts of ways of its own. But many of the smaller colleges, you must read Patrick Bury's History of Corpus. You'll enjoy that. Many of the smaller colleges said, no Indian shall be admitted. Full stop. But after the Great War came this thing, so many brave Indians have given their lives for king and country, they should be admitted. So statutes were changed, rules were changed, maybe they were in ordinances only in some colleges. Anyway, so the background was that I was admitted to Corpus, so I fell in love with Corpus. I said, well, look, this college has done something extraordinary in electing me. I was the first teaching fellow who was an immigrant, who was not expected to perform to the levels of others, who was elected. So I then decided that I would do whatever it took to do my duty at Corpus. Later on, I was made an assistant tutor, asked to be an assistant tutor, and I was very flattered by that. I said, look, okay, I don't want to do this, it'll interfere with my research. I don't want to do this, but they've asked me to do it, and I owe a debt to Corpus. So Corpus won again. And then they left me in peace when I finished my term after that, and the then masters and so on were very aware that my research career was progressing. And when I was made a reader, they allowed me to stop teaching. I asked if I could stop teaching and retain my fellowship, and they said yes, which again was a great kindness of the college to do this. But then he asked me, the then master, Michael Macfarlane, asked me to be head of the research students part of Corpus, Leckhampton.
Leckhampton, yes.
I was asked if I would be president, and I declined with alacrity because I didn't think I would be very good at all these sort of social occasions and things.
You were married by then?
Oh yes, I had been married a long time by then, but Anne and I did this together. We've shared our lives, and she was wonderful as warden's wife as well, because I became warden of Leckhampton. I said that job I will do, but I didn't want to be president. The warden was the real job. When I finished with that, then I said, okay, now I can sit back. I've done my duty for Corpus. But again, when the Corpus mastership election, as in many other colleges, runs this course, that they try and isolate an internal candidate as a sort of stalking horse against the much more distinguished external candidates who will apply. So when they were advertising worldwide for applicants to be the external candidates, they had isolated me for some reason as the stalking horse. So I was quite happy that, okay, I'm popular with the fellows, so what? But then, you see, I suppose they then decided to elect me, and when I can't deny that I was very flattered also to be asked. But I also felt that, this college gave me a fellowship when nobody else would look at me. And so I was definitely had this mixture of feelings. I'm flattered. But what gave me most pleasure of all was when the daughter of a master long ago, who was master in the 1920s, and she was still alive, wrote to me that you've been elected as the first internal candidate for nearly a century. So I thought that's wonderful, that they should ask me. One of the curious letters of congratulation I received said, "It says much for the fellows of Corpus that they have elected you." And I think that's true.
So tell me a few of the highs and lows of being Master of Corpus.
Oh yes, well, it has its highs and lows, as you rightly said. Well, but one of the high moments was when John Taylor wrote me a letter saying that he'd like to come and see me. John Taylor is the inventor of the cordless kettle, and therefore his kettle has been outstandingly successful. Therefore he became a very rich man. And he came to see me, and we got along extremely well. We discovered that we were the same age, and he said to me that I will help you to do whatever your ambition is for the college. So I said, we'd like to build a new library. He said, I'll give you half the money. What a wonderful way to start a mastership. So suddenly somebody says, I'll give you millions to do what you want to do in the college in your time as master. So that was a very great highlight of the
Was he an old Corpus?
Old member, yes. Yeah. Who'd come to Corpus at the same time as went to Imperial. And so we were exactly the same age.
And he was an engineer too.
He's actually did physics, but he's more of an engineer than I'm a physicist. So that was a very big highlight. And I think that I had to look after the Parker Library and the building of the Conservation Centre, which is again, through an old member, managed to raise the money to build the Conservation Centre for the college, to build a library in my time, to get the Corpus clock put in, which you no doubt have seen.
The recent one,
Yes.
Stephen Hawking opened.
Yes, I took that through my governing body in a painful series of meetings. And then the digitization of the Parker manuscripts. So it's a very active mastership. I did a lot of things, I think, in my mastership, with the help of numerous fellows who were wonderful, and with the opposition of numerous fellows who were not so wonderful. We got it done. And in a college, to get things done is a curious interplay of democracy and leadership and bending and pushing and so on. So I found that I was able to do these things. And partly because I had been a fellow for so long that they more or less trusted me. And I suppose the most touching moment was when I left and they gave me a little silver present. And I can't do Latin, it's not educated properly. But it was all inscribed in Latin, so I asked William Horbury, who's a Latin scholar, one of maybe you know him, Professor of Jewish and Christian Studies, great authority on Latin. I said, William, could you read this to me in English, please? And he said, yes, it says, to a much loved master.
Oh, nice.
I thought that was very nice.
Lovely.
To have been efficient would have been one thing, but to be loved is another.
No higher praise.
So I retired in very good grace and very happy that although there had been ups and downs in the mastership and a very big down, on the whole, I had had a wonderful time.
Then you say you retired from that, but you became an advisor to the Pakistan government.
I didn't retire, actually. I uniquely among Corpus Masters resigned.
Resigned?
Because that's an interesting story. Well, President Musharraf and his colleague, Professor Atar Rahman, who is an honorary fellow of this college.
Oh, yes.
They jointly approached me to help them in a new scheme that they had dreamed up. Professor Haroon Ahmed had dreamed up a scheme where he'd got 5 European countries to commit to setting up universities, their universities in Pakistan. And Japanese university and a Korean university as well. And they'd looked around and they had identified me as perhaps uniquely, and I mean, if I can claim uniqueness, this was unique, that I was an academic, that I knew about Pakistan, and that I was connected with all levels of academic life in Europe and America and Korea and Japan, having spent 40 plus years here. And they put a powerful case to me that if anybody could do to help them in this, because I could open doors in Europe, and I could sort of help to get the university set up in Pakistan, and I speak Urdu as fluently as anybody else, and I could sort of mingle in there, and I could do this thing. And in the end, I accepted their arguments, that they couldn't find anybody else in the world who would have this sort of link so Western, and yet when I'm in Pakistan and everybody hears me speak, they think I'm the most cultured Pakistani around. Because I still speak in that old-fashioned way. No Americanisms and no mixtures of languages. So they think I'm very cultured. So that because of that, I took this thing and I resigned from the mastership in the last year. I would have been master for another year only. Then I would have had to retire. I said, look, everything's fine. The library is built, the clock is done, the conservation center. Do I do anything else? I haven't got time to do anything more. Let us leave it to better people and do this for Pakistan and Europe, because I think it's just equally as good for Europe that these universities should be there. So I did that. I left to do that, and for 2 years I worked harder than I have ever worked in my life.
And successfully at all?
My part of it was totally successful. I have left them with a scheme and with connections and with everything in place to do something quite wonderful. But alas, both Atar Rahman and I suffer from a huge disappointment that the government changed and the new government won't have any truck with it. But just imagine 5 universities, 7 if to take the Asian ones, taking this huge bulk of young people and moving them out of extremism into, and each one who would graduate from this would create 1,000 more moderate people in this country. Was such an opportunity missed. So I'm sad towards the end of my career not to have achieved this. But then, you know,
you've achieved a great deal.
I've left them with a scheme which is entirely workable, and no foreigners will go to Pakistan at the moment. So at the moment the scheme couldn't have been implemented because it meant all the Europeans going and teaching in Pakistan at these universities initially, while they trained up the Pakistani academics.
But at some point, when in the future, when if the situation improves a lot and you get another government, it could be taken up again.
Indeed, yes. I hope that in the next decade things will calm down. You know, not unfortunately, fortunately in some ways, the scheme is being taken up by other countries. I don't mind. It's to me, it's a pleasure that the ideas are being picked up. So Imperial is going to. I'm on the board of Imperial College now. All the things to happen is where you arrive as an undergraduate and then they put you on the board of the college. It's a wonderful feeling. So when they told me that they were setting up a university, hoping to set up universities in India in the same model, I was delighted.
Well, we've just got a few minutes left. Is there anything particular which you'd like me to have asked you about? There's so much in a life, more than what one can say in a short interview, but anything more about, for example, your wife, Anne?
Yes, well, I was going to say to you that what we haven't talked about, and I suppose you didn't do that in your other interviews as well, you don't talk about family.
Not much,
No.
But just do tell me about your family a little bit.
Well, you see, my family, my life here has been so unconventional in the sense that I married an English woman who's a vicar's daughter, and she played a huge part in my life. I like talking about incidents that you've noticed because they form people, and We married, and there was her father being the vicar. There was the blessing was in his church because he had to have a registry of his wedding because I wasn't subscribed to religion. But we married we had a blessing, and in the blessing stood many of my father-in-law's friends who were themselves now bishops and priests and so on in the congregation in the marriage ceremony. But it was many, many years later when I carried the Canterbury Gospels for the enthronement of Rowan Williams into Canterbury that among the bishops was the then Bishop of Rochester, Bishop Say, and he wrote a little piece in the parish magazine that this young man whom I blessed with some trepidation, marrying my best friend's daughter, and he not being a believer in Christianity and so on, I was so thrilled to see him carrying the Canterbury Gospels through to the enthronement of Rowan Williams. So she played a huge part in my life, and so did my children.
Daughters, did you say, or no?
2 daughters and a son, and all 3 played a huge part. But I think you've run out of time, so we'll leave it at
no, that's a very important part of one's life. What are your children doing now?
The 2 daughters are both academics. One, by curious chance, is working in the King's Archives at the moment.
Really?
Looking at E.M. Foster's connections with India. She's a scholar and she's doing some research. She works. They're going off to Durham. She and her husband, but they're at Sussex University at the moment. And the other one lives in Cambridge, and she's a educational psychologist and teaches people how to set examination papers to achieve the right outcome. Both have PhDs, and my son is a tennis coach.
So you've got both sides of your character there, sport and...
I wish he'd studied
cricket. Cricket would have been nice.
He's very good at all sport, but at tennis he excels, so he's just qualified as a tennis coach. He's a lot younger than the daughters. He's adopted, but just as precious. And he turned out to be very good at sport. I mean, I'm sorry, I really actually created him in that sense that we played sport from day one. But the girls weren't very keen on sport.
Well, you can mention to one of your daughters who's working on canes in India that you were being interviewed next to E.M. Forster's clock.
E.M. Foster in India, yeah.
E.M. Forster's clock here, and
E.M. Foster's clock here, and Keynes's
wardrobe behind you.
Here.
So,
and my wife read economics, and so we got very keen.
So there's the wardrobe, and there's the clock.